So we just got to get with it and get it done.
Yeah, for this particular one in batteries and for this type of project in general, once it gets below a certain power level, it's the PUC and not the FERC. But can the PUC go back to this particular example of the FERC and use that as a precedent for establishing the same incentives?
Well, first of all, as long as it's on transmission, it's FERC, not PUC, because transmission is under the Federal Power Act, all regulated by FERC, with the exception of Texas, which is Texas. But all else throughout the country, it's regulated at FERC. Because Texas has its own interconnection, it's all regulated by the state in Texas. So, but there's nothing that would prevent a state from looking at storage on the distribution level that serves the same function of congestion reduction and saying, why don't we treat this as distribution plant and allow it to get embedded in distribution rates with the same kind of treatment as a distribution system would get. And in fact, I think there's a wonderful business model for distribution utilities to say, wait a minute, it would cost me X amount of dollars to improve a substation because I have, the circuit is getting overloaded, versus someone putting in a microgrid where there's some storage and I could relieve the circuit with the storage. And if the distribution utility has given the right to invest behind the meter, they very well might like that investment, particularly if they can then rate base it. So I see this as a very efficient model that recognizes that storage, unlike any other resource, is extremely flexible. It serves both of, well, they all serve. It recognizes the fact that storage serves a reliability function as well as a energy production function. So did I answer your question? I didn't mean to be. And then, so the other thing that's happening is right now is, and if you haven't been aware of this, FERC staff just issued, it's not a notice of proposed rulemaking because it's coming out of the staff, but the staff has an inquiry. They're looking for comments. How should we treat storage? Is it a transmission asset? Is it not a transmission asset? How can we compensate it? How much we can compensate it? And how do we treat it in the markets as an ancillary service? So they're actively engaged. I would suggest you look at the FERC website, but they're looking for comments on this very topic. Where's my clicker? The other element that I think, so those are, I guess, to close off that discussion. Yeah, the federal government is very actively at Congress and FERC gets it. They understand the value of storage. They're they're very bullish on it, and now they're trying to figure out what's the right, not whether we should allow it, but what's the right treatment to get us where we want to go. So it's a good climate. The other piece is the question is what's happening at the state level, and I'm sure if you've been in a conference, energy conference in the last year, you've seen this slide, or 2 years. So this is all the states that have renewable portfolio standards. And the point of all this is that the industry is recognizing the huge amount of potential renewables that are going to happen on the grid and are actively looking at what are the implications now for grid management in having all these renewables. And so the fact of the matter is if you look at these queues, and I pulled out all of the queues of the various ISOs, and the queues are basically all of the generators are asking to interconnect to the grid. And so across the country, and even on the East, New York, you wouldn't think about this, California, obviously, Midwest, obviously, the majority of new generation that's coming on, that wants to be built is wind and solar. And so all the ISOs are looking at what are the implications of this, California in particular, because of, California right now, and they're very anxious about it, is not only how are they going to meet the 33% renewables, but secondly, how are they going to manage it? And so obviously for them, storage is a very, very important issue. What's good is that all of the independent system operators have recognized that they will not be able to manage renewables unless they have significant amounts of storage, and they're technology agnostic. They don't care whether it comes in as flywheels, as large-scale batteries, as electric vehicles, as small-scale storage systems. They just need to know that they can measure it, manage it, and control it. And so they're very, very anxious and looking at various experiments. For example, in PJM, we have, there are two, and New York. In New York, there's a flywheel system that's up and going we're using for regulation. In PJM, there's 2 marriage batteries and there's 2 electric vehicle pilots that folks are looking at for regulation. So the grid operators are very actively engaged in seeing and measuring and using storage on the grid so that they could start developing the models. And the reason, of course, and I'm sure you've all seen these slides, right? Is what they look at. This is from the California ISO, is basically the impact on the system when you have a large amount of renewables, is the stability problems you achieve. These are excursions that you can't manage, and the value of storage being able to basically manage those peaks and keep the grid in balance. And so one of the things that's very interesting is, to me anyway, is the amount of regulation that is going to have to be put onto the grid. That's the amount of basically capability on the system to increase and decrease in very rapidly to keep the grid stable with additional wind and solar. Because the problem is, with wind you can disperse it geographically, so you could smooth it out somewhat. Solar is actually harder because when the cloud cover comes in, it's gone. You don't have the floating down effect. And so what the grid operators are looking at is how do we maintain system balance when one moment you have it, the next minute it's gone because the clouds are over. And the only way to do this is when you have a lot of storage on the grid or vehicles. And what we found out with PJM when I was there, and just continuing into all the ISOs, is that electric vehicles and batteries operate much better as regulation devices than almost anything else, and are much better than generators because you don't have the wear and tear on the system. So it's certainly an exciting time for that. The other thing that FERC is doing, then, to answer your question, is what's happening on someone asked me about behind the meter, is FERC is also recognizing that when you have storage that sits behind the meter, meaning at a customer location, and this could be ice storage, this could be an electric vehicle. In Veridity, we're actually even using thermodynamic load buildings that we can measure and control the usage of, is that they can be very valuable. And so the FERC, in an order issued several years ago, is called 719, they basically told all the grid operators who they manage that in the markets, a megawatt is the same as a megawatt. A megawatt hour is the same as a megawatt hour. And so the ability to reduce loading on the grid through load, that you can switch from a grid-based resource to an internal resource, has the same economic value to the markets, actually the same value to the grid as something that's on the grid, like a generator or storage device. So they've required the grid operators and the markets to be absolutely neutral as to whether something is coming in the form of load reduction or generation increase, so long as it achieves the same outcome, which is a balanced system. I have 2 questions, one in the back and one in the front. Go ahead, good.
Okay.
Ben with the money goes first.
You mentioned vehicle to grid
Yeah.
Twice now. I'm just wondering, if I as a consumer have an EV, what's my incentive to make my vehicle available for that? How are you going to compensate me for the wear and tear on my battery?
This is my favorite topic. So and wait, no, this is my turn. You're next. Now, Sven, I know you probably, but here's what I would do, and Sven's going to tell you his answer. I don't know if you know Sven from Good Energies, but he's the man with Bayer Place. Sorry, Good Energies is the investment company. So the way FERC looks at it, okay, as everyone is aware, the markets are basically the price in the wholesale markets. It's the intersection of supply and demand in real time at each location. So FERC is basically saying, if in fact you are willing to reduce, you get the clearing price. So let's say in the next hour, Cal ISO says we need 1,000 megawatts of regulation. And you have Terry Moan or you have me or somebody managing a microgrid where there are electric vehicles, so we could identify the amount of batteries. We'll bid that into the market. And if the clearing price in that market for regulation is $260, you get paid the $260 in order to make available your ability to regulate with batteries. If you would add that to a better place, you don't have to worry about the wear and tear on your battery because they own the battery, and they'll monetize the value of that in terms of their price. So the compensation is that now suddenly you have distributed resources you're using on the grid, and you get paid for those resources in lieu of, as an owner, so in lieu of paying the Sempra for that regulation service, I get paid for that regulation service, which then offsets my costs. And then you have a business model such as Better Place, which says you don't even have to worry about the wear and tear. We'll deal with that.